to our speakers. Nitesh, I was thinking about your PTSD model, and I've got a different kind of PTSD from working with my agentic team just from this morning. So I got a call at about 7:30 a.m. this morning from one of my largest clients to say that a large part of my pack that was going into procurement for approval for my budget for the work coming up this year was missing. And I said, that's impossible. And went back and I looked, and of course, my agent had replicated some other aspects, decided for me that two-thirds of my budget should be cut. And I didn't see this, and it was submitted to the client today. That was number one. Number two, this this presentation that you see was obviously I put it through one of my agents, and it came back looking like gobbledygook. And I said, don't think for me. I'm the smart one here. I know what I know. Just make it pretty. And, I don't understand where the content came from. So there was hallucinations. I couldn't verify a lot of the content sources. And I was just like, please do not touch my material. Just use the palettes, use the colors, and spit it out. And, it took me about an hour and a half longer than I should have to get the slides off to Shivani this afternoon. So I do have a PTSD of a different kind. So let's just get into risk. So thank you, Shivani. When we look at where we are in terms of risk mitigation and artificial intelligence, we can look at what we saw at the beginning of last year versus mid last year, end of last year, and where we are now. At the very beginning, we were looking at ethics. We were saying principles around, thank you, where are we? On the previous slide, principles around transparency, accountability. We were still trying to unpack what it meant to us and what we believed in the unknown. In other words, the idea and the concepts of how AI could actually harm us. By the end of last year, if you did not have the foundations in place, you were seriously, at a back leg in terms of where you were in protecting your business. So when we look at ethics, we're no longer asking, what does this actually mean? And thank you to the OECD principles, etc. What we're asking is, how do we convert this into our business? So how does transparency and explainability, convert into operations? So asking very simple questions such as how visible the inputs have been, how justifiable the outputs are, what do our model cards look like, how do we explain this? What does fairness really mean within our environment in terms of our democratic representation? What does human rights protection mean? It's a very abstract, but when we drill down to it, how do we take this into the operational environment? And this is something we should be looking at quite more closely as we move forward as AI advances. So as I said, there was ethics that came in. Then we had the foundationals in terms of let's adopt some basic frameworks. So maybe a little bit of EU AI, a little bit of NIST, which has been around for ages. But right now, if you're not looking at automation, you're going to have frustrated employees like I was this morning, wasting a lot of time reducing productivity. Thank you. So the types of risk can vary. I mean, originally we were unsure and we were in a very foggy environment, and we were looking at black boxes, not understanding what was inside, thinking everything can be blamed on the algorithm. It's not that easy anymore. Currently, we're still looking at the type of risks within the technical environment, like Nitesh mentioned, anything from data integrity, model drifting, all the technical aspects that a data engineer or the engineering team needs to focus on. The non-technical still seems to be at the forefront. The impact on individuals, on the social environment, on our kids, how it's being used, and our teams, our people. So Greg, you're quite right. Jobs, people, very, very important. But probably the highest risk is our people. And the most biggest mitigating factor is our people. So we've got to embed, learnings, or we've got to embed risk mitigation with our people in terms of processes, training, education, because that's where the highest risk lies. And just on that, if you look back 20, 30 years, as the internet arrived, as social media arrived, as digitization increased and took much more of our working environments and our personal spaces, the only thing we could rely on, and we keep going back to, is monitoring and managing human behavior, either to manage risks and the potential losses that we may experience as businesses and organizations, or within our personal environments. So currently, the risks also start looking a little bit different. So the evolving risks currently is we're looking at static controls, that we're not doing enough, we're not moving fast enough, we don't have real-time mitigation. The grok issue arrived. It's still going on in terms of the use of images inappropriately, but how fast do we respond, even though the US at state level has the Take Them Down Act, but we still saw exploitation in terms of our images and so forth. The other is, of course, agentic AI. And this is the new kid on the block in terms of compliance. Thanks to the latest pieces of work coming out, we have some guidelines in terms of how to govern and have self-controls, self-regulations and controls in place in terms of agentic and autonomous AI. Very quickly there on the slide, you would see that we still need to assess and define and map what those are, and then determine what decisions you cannot make for me, what phone calls you cannot make for me, what expenses you may not pay for me, what are the thresholds and what mandates I can put in place, and control those automated decisions. I went online to say, how do I stop automation on this agent? And it popped up. Go here, adjust these controls, and you're able to do that. So let's think about how we can control that from an end user perspective. Thank you. Next slide. All right, so the next two slides, this is a little bit difficult to see, but I think what's important here is the links that I'm sharing with you. If you're interested in risk tracking, I found these great resources last night, scrolling around. The MIT AI Risk Initiative, which tracks based on documentation what they have seen to be the most common and predominant risks over the last many years. And a lot of it has to do with social issues, has to deal with non-technical issues. There isn't a technical component. The other resources are in the next slides. Then there's IBM. I think if you're interested in learning about, first the OECD AI Incidents and Hazards Monitor, also found on their website, which I wanted to share this resource with you. The IBM AI Risk Atlas, which then teaches you about the different types of risks, technical, non-technical, agentic, generative, LLM, etc. And then what I found really interesting was the AI Incident Database. It's current actual use cases that have gone completely wrong, and it's beautifully drafted, and you can actually get quite a bit of info. In terms of this particular slide, what the OECD did was to track in terms of publications through newspapers, articles, etc. What were the prevalent and how prevalent AI risks and threats were over the last many years. But what they did say is that the number of publications started to reduce as the risks became more common. So it wasn't news anymore. So we're not hearing about it as much as we used to. Next, please. All right, so these are the foundational controls that should and must be in place even before you're thinking agentic or autonomous self-regulations and controls. So you either in a country that has soft laws or co-regulations or some form of strategic frameworks, like most all the countries in Egypt, in Africa, such as Egypt. And so what we got to do is we've got to borrow, looking at perhaps borrowing from the EU AI legislation, which is the grand dam of our legislations globally, NIST, which is coming out of the US, ISO 42001, which is the gold standard for any kind of standardization, and the IEEE standards. So we can borrow from this and we can develop something internally based on very fundamental principles. Number one is let's look at the risks and being able to prioritize from the most critical and to the least. Let's then assess and map where we are, and we can then allocate resources. Allocation of resources requires leadership buy-in. So I'm not sure what your board is doing and how they feel about AI and the controls, but there needs to be proper buy-in, because the biggest reason for the governance gap is that at board level, we are not resourcing our businesses and empowering our management to be incorporating governance more strictly. And of course, then we go through the cycle of being able to identify risks, plug them in with the correct resources, and continuously review and manage this with the correct controls in place. Okay, next, please. Okay. So from my perspective, in my practice, the biggest concern for any threat, harm, anything coming our way is how much loss what kind of losses we could be faced with. Of course, financial loss, reputational, are probably the most significant. So when we are dealing with any person out of our organization, vendors, suppliers, we need to ensure that we are assuming 100% accountability. So this is including the agents that we are using. So in autonomous tools, normal generative LLMs, we may not claim to our clients that it wasn't me. Okay, so accountability 100% still internal. What are we doing about it? So once again, internal self-regulations controls are absolutely must. The potential losses would be contractual breaches. So I would definitely look at all contracts that's either been prepared internally, externally, that we are looking for indemnifications, liabilities, who's carrying the liabilities, what kind of liabilities, whether they're product, what sort of remediation we would look at. So that would be your contracts. If you were liable for any type of third parties, non-compliance with regulations within their environments, within their jurisdiction. And of course, how this would impact, for example, myself, professional negligence. Will I be liable in terms of damages by a client suing me, and therefore, resulting in reputational loss? Next, please. Okay, so our global response to AI. This is thanks to the IAPP that I was able to track the current AI laws and policies in place. We have a handful of countries such as China and the US that are leading in terms of legislations and regulations. And then we've got a couple of others like South Korea and Canada that didn't quite pass their bills, but that have actual hard legislations in place. Most of them are risk-based approaches, which is identifying and prioritizing most significant, most harmful to least. And then the rest of the countries, such as the UAE, Egypt, even the UK, it's very much a pro-innovation, co-regulatory approach with the provision of frameworks and policies, which means it's driving organizations, enterprises to look at internal controls that need to be developed for best fit for their purpose within their context, within the industry, and within the highest risks that they've identified. Thank you. And what I find in the absence of a single law, it does not mean that you do not have any protections in place. Existing laws are sufficient in many, many ways. So in South Africa, as the onslaught of cases increased in our courts and globally, we did not, create and most, I think, jurisdictions did not create new legislations around social media. And the same for AI. So we can lean on our regulatory frameworks. If you have the Constitution, definitely you have personal data protection, you have cybercrime, cybersecurity protection legislations, you've got criminal procedures and IP protections. You've got your human capital and your labor laws that you can rely on. And you can borrow, as I say, from soft laws within the UAE and then learn from the regulations in the US and China. Of course, we also have our DLECT, which is the ability to be able to sue to claim damages in the events of losses. And then on the right side there, we've got the current trends is that the number one type of case that's going to court at the moment is for IP breaches. And number two is still the breach of protection of personal data. Those are the two most common cases currently at court. Thank you. Okay, so how would I approach this if I was an enterprise and no laws, not sure where I should start? The first is identify whether I'm a provider, I'm a developer, and I'm a user, and where am I in terms of the AI life cycle. I would then definitely determine in terms of my AI maturity, who is using and how we're using, what we're utilizing, creating an inventory or registers, and from there developing policies. Embedding them in terms of our behaviors and practices and bringing them to life, because policy and guidelines on their own is insufficient. Thank you. Next slide. Right. And finally, from myself, my immediate action would be managing third-party liabilities. So if I had to wake up tomorrow morning and I haven't done anything in terms of AI, I would request that all contracts be brought in for review. How can we amend them? What sort of conduct a risk analysis? All vendors create a due diligence questionnaire, send them out to all your current vendors, and perhaps amend your vendor DD process moving forward, and creating some kind of oversight in terms of third-party liability and where those hot or those high heat areas may be, and then start developing controls for them, including documentation that could enhance those relationships, protect those relationships, internal policies, and embedding them within your business. Thank you. I hope that was helpful. Thanks, everyone.